The fact that we are able to now take a product, impact persons' lives in a significant manner, be it a slight fastener in the right position that changes millions of people's ability to interact with clothing. That was for us an objective/measure of success when we created Lable by Aasif.
We realized first and foremost there was very big necessity in addressing disability narratives in Sri Lanka, because disability itself has this narrative of it has a lot of stigma.
So Lable by MAS, also known as the Adaptive Center of Excellence, is MAS Holdings' dedicated pillar for inclusive and accessible clothing, whereabout we design, validate, and manufacture products with production feasibility in mind to be able to provide inclusive options or accessibility across the board to our brands. In terms of the why, I would say that this is fundamentally rooted in rights, in passion, in doing what is right by the world, by consumers. Something I'm proud of is MAS's fundamental tenets: product, people, planet. The fact that we are able to now take a product and impact persons' lives in a significant manner, be it a slight fastener in the right position that changes millions of people's ability to interact with clothing. That was for us an objective/measure of success when we created Lable by Aasif. So we work in an industry which is superficially driven by the perfect fit, with users that have 2 arms, 2 legs, that have the ideal shape and size in terms of clothing. And in a world where clothing is considered your metaphorical armor in the gladiator arena that you call life, it couldn't be more important for us to be able to create clothing that gives users independence and freedom to be able to express themselves and be themselves out there in public. In 2021, with the pandemic, something that we realized is the fact that consumers were being more mindful, conscientious, woke. They were being more critical about where they buy, what they buy, and what it's meant for. Fast fashion was a norm that is pretty much dying out, and multifunctional products were something that we were seeing. So that's where we saw this as an opportune moment to sort of put forward inclusivity to our brands. What we realized is that creating a brand called Lable, it was fundamentally meant to do 2 things. So number one was the fact that we wanted to create awareness, create a bridge in Sri Lankan society in terms of what was out there. Secondly, it is to bring in credibility to our brands, to be able to prove that our products have undertaken these processes, to be able to be called out as inclusive and adaptive apparel. We are conduits. We are simply creators. We take inspiration from our consumers. We then create a product, validate it, and then manufacture. So without our consumer base and without being deeply rooted in co-creation, we wouldn't be able to even get here. And something that I'm very proud of is the fact that before this was even conceived, MAS had already created the infrastructure and the systems to employ persons with disabilities in our business across multiple business entities, where we are proud to call out over 470 persons with disabilities, which we use and collaborate with for functional testing of our products in Sri Lanka. This is something that was kickstarted especially during the global pandemic, where we were unable to travel across, visit our traditional consumer base in our traditional consumer markets. So being able to work at home with our consumers really brought us closer to an unlock in a much faster manner. On top of that, the fact that MAS is an inclusive employment provider meant that we were shielded as product creators within the walls of MAS. As soon as we left MAS, we realized that there was no one representative of a person with disabilities out there in the general public. So that's where we came about with our partnership with the National Paralympic team, and we've been proud to clothe them as their official clothing sponsor since 2021, where we create clothing across their intimates, lifestyle or leisure, and game day/performance wear, for these athletes. Most notably, the fact that we were able to clothe them during the Asian Para Games, where 11 of the 26 athletes came back home with wins, with medals. Being able to work with our athletes is something that we emphasize heavily, because a call out that we make is, if our athletes can't break it, we can't break it. And being able to stress test our products at that extreme level is something critical whenever you put forward a solve, especially in a market that's so new and consumers and brands tentative or hesitant to get in the space. So credibility that we build through our consumers was absolutely mission critical to be able to make this a success. So in terms of what we want to do or where we want to go, I would say the first is going to be verticals. We want to expand vertically. Inclusivity is something that we see all around us in our day-to-day lives. It could be your grandparents, parents, your siblings. It could be people out there. It's just something that you don't see. We want to be able to support persons that are post-operative recovery, the elderly, versus people who are suffering temporary setbacks in their life. So vertically expanding our product portfolio to be able to solve across the board is number one. Secondly being, we want to be able to be the para sports launch partner, where we're taking products to the 2024 Paralympics. We want to be able to be identified and support teams moving forward from a performance perspective. And that would be our goal for the next 2 years.
So that's a really good question, actually, because when we were thinking about it, when we got into the whole aspect of creating adaptive clothing, it was to answer a global need. But when we also looked into the local audience and, the local disability community, we looked at how they could benefit from the adaptive solves. But that's when we realized that there lies a bigger problem there, because it's not the adaptive solves or adaptive clothing that really needs to be addressed at a starting point, because we realized first and foremost, there was a very big necessity in addressing disability narratives in Sri Lanka. Because disability itself it has a lot of stigma, it has a lot of shame, it's considered a taboo topic. And that's when we realized we needed to do something before we get into the adaptive solves or adaptive fashion when it comes to Sri Lanka, which we are trying to do as well. We are working towards, workshops and stuff like that, where we can actually teach what we know and then kind of upskill them to kind of really get into the basics of what adaptive clothing is, so that they can upskill themselves and find and do it on clothing that they can afford, do it in ways that they have been doing, and to kind of really uplift that in a way. To talk about the stigmas and all of that, the brand, we try to do so much work when it comes to changing this narrative surrounding disability in Sri Lanka. When we worked with the communities, when we were dealing with the communities, there were so many stories we were exposed to, so many points of view, so many perspectives. We dealt with so many people who told us, some of them even spoke about how disability, again, comes from this very shameful or karmic-driven conversation in Sri Lanka. So it's about, for example, there are families who, if they have multiple kids and have one kid with a disability, they wouldn't even talk about it around their own community. So when we talk about a culture or a society that's built around thoughts and perspectives like this, we feel like there's a bigger job to do in terms of changing this narrative, in terms of creating these conversations that we want to really invest ourselves in. And to do this, we actually do a lot of events, we actually do a lot of sessions when it comes to talks and stuff. So our first, this goes back to 2022. One of the first events we did on International Day of Persons with Disabilities was actually centered around terminology. It was a panel discussion where we had Mr. Priyantha from the National Paralympic Committee. We had Niluka Gunawardana, who is a scholar and an activist, different other people from the communities, to kind of really talk about terminology as a first entry into this subject, as to what the right terminology is when it comes to addressing a person with a disability, which we know is that now, persons with disabilities, according to the UN. So as we know, that is the correct terminology. But in the past, there have been so many other words that we ourselves have used, whether it's handicapped or whether it's crippled. These are words we no longer use, but today we know are wrong. Again, to reiterate this question of what are we doing to change these narratives, we are also trying. We are also learning. It's a journey that we're always on. So what we invite other people to kind of, join along with us so that we can learn together. When it comes to persons with disabilities in Sri Lanka, that is actually almost 9% of the Sri Lankan population, which is about 1.6 to 1.7 million, right? And that's quite a fair number. That's pretty much 1 in 11 people. So if you look around, that's like if you look around and see, 1 in every 11 person you see is probably a person with a disability. But is that what we really see around society? Is that what we see in our day-to-day lives when we move about or kind of mingle with society? Which is not the case. If you look at it, if the numbers speak for themselves, like 29% of Sri Lankans' disability population is only engaged in the workforce. There's over 70%, that's about 71% that's not. And if you consider that, if you think about it, accessibility is a huge issue. And that whether it's for resources when it comes to education or employment, accessibility is a big problem. And even in transport. So when you can't find the resource to get educated or find the resources to then find employment or find transport essentially to get from point A to B to educate yourself or to go to your job. There's a lot of issues kind of working against the disability community, and there's a lot of things that we need to kind of talk about. These are primary issues that we seek to talk about or try to address as well. The recent exhibition that we did, that's something we did call out, because while we are also doing something, we do see other companies, we do see organizations also around the country, doing something in their own means, doing what they can in their own way. And we've always been open, and what we are always really, what we're trying to push now as well is to invite different corporations, whether you're a conglomerate or a big company, whether it's a corporation or an organization. Are you a non-profit? Are you a for-profit? Or are you an individual? We're looking at different people who can kind of, come together with us, because in a way, we also believe that while everyone does their own small things, together we can actually do something even big. We can create actual change within this culture, within this society that can truly impressively benefit the community of persons with disabilities in this country. Event that we just recently had, which was an exhibition at One Golf Face titled 9 Navaya Onbadu. So this exhibition was in honor of the 9% to raise awareness and to give a perspective to the majority able-bodied audience in Sri Lanka. So it was an exhibition funneled with artists, fueled with artists, where we kind of had these different rooms that kind of spoke about the different communities, that allowed people to interact with these art pieces, installations, that people could kind of have a sense or an experience of what the community faces on a daily. So we also aim to take this exhibition, for example, across the island, across the 9 provinces as well. These are the initiatives that we kind of do to raise awareness, to kind of create this conversation going, this conversation flowing, so that people will talk about it more, so that it becomes something you talk about it on the daily, whether it's to your kids, whether it's to your coworker. It's a topic that you can talk about and you should talk about, rather than what we've been taught as, something we kind of avoid.